some people are morally uneasy with the idea of markets that give investors a rooting interest in the early death or the misfortune of others. I'd like to come back to this question about whether promoting or encouraging certain virtues and discouraging certain bad attitudes is a legitimate reason for constraining markets through law. And let's take an example to test this. Take the case of death pools, this internet game that involves gambling on the lives of celebrities. You try to predict who will die in the coming year, and you typically give a list, I don't know, of 10 well-known people, and whoever gets the most correct guesses wins the pot. Now, there is no socially redeeming purpose that's served. It's just a kind of death bet for fun and some profit. How many find it ethically objectionable, death pools? How many find it ethically objectionable, death pools? Almost everyone. How many would ban it? So almost everyone finds it morally objectionable. Only a handful would ban it. Why is that? Let's hear first from someone who finds it morally troubling, but would not ban it.
The reason why I wouldn't ban it, but I still find it morally objectionable, comes back to one can make moral judgments, but not necessarily legislate them.
Emily.
I think there are a couple of reasons for this. One of these goes back to the idea of the lack of consent.
None of the celebrities give their consent to being voted upon. For it to be morally acceptable, the people would have to phone up the Pope and say, do you mind if I vote, if I put you on my list? What that even mean?
It seems absurd to do that.
Yeah.
For me, I think even if they were to give their consent, I still find it morally objectionable. And between people who find this site interesting and enjoyable and people who would go out in the world and act upon that sensibility that leads them to this site,
right.
I think that there creates a danger to the rest of society in that sense.
So clearly that would be morally objectionable. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that the laws against murder, particularly of celebrities, can be enforced. And let's just assume that the existence of these internet death pools does not lead to people going out and assassinating celebrities. I'm trying to get at whether there is some objection to the attitude, to the lack of virtue, that should make enough of a difference to constrain markets in this case.
I don't think that engaging with a death pool has enough of a negative externality to deem it important to write that into law.
You used the word negative externality. I was asking about attitudes and virtues. Do you think they're the same?
One kind of negative externality is some kind of tainted social norm. And in this case, the social norm that's created by death pools is not strong enough to warrant legislation.
Traditionally, externalities are thought to be effects on third parties, and typically tangible physical harms, taking the life or violating the liberty of a third party. Does giving expression to bad attitudes, does that also count as a negative externality?
I think so. I think that rape porn, for example, the perverse attitudes that are created by that have a negative externality in the sense that they create a negative attitude towards women and they endorse rape. And for me, that is an instance in which the law should become involved. But in this case, I find that there is not a problem with death pools because no one's being harmed. I think the correlation you would find between people becoming murderers and engaging in death pools is probably quite low.
All right, now I want to come to Lindsay on this question. Constraining markets because they express and promote bad attitudes.
I'm a strong proponent of liberal neutrality, where I do not believe it's easy to say what a bad attitude is. I think that is different for every person and should not be subscribed into law. And in this particular case, my problem is with the issue of consent. If they were to telephone up somebody and ask for consent, then I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Why the need for consent?
Once again, I feel like the person is so directly involved in this.
Well, but suppose a journalist writes an unflattering review of some famous actor's performance in a play or in a movie, do they have to get their
But
consent?
the difference with that is that the person is providing a service, and I don't see that is playing out here. If I knew that 70% of people thought I was going to die that year without my giving consent to them being a part of that, I would say that's the problem.
Now, these are all public figures. These are all celebrities. Lots of things are written and published about them all the time, many of them derogatory. Think of the politicians on the list.
And I'm totally fine with being derogatory in terms of their actions, their participation in films, or the speeches that they just gave.
Even without their consent?
That's fine, because that's their service that they have chosen to provide to society.
All right, so Kevin, what do you say in the death pools?
Oh, absolutely wrong. They should be illegal.
You agree,
They
Abdul?
should be illegal because, regardless if there is consent or not, because there is a negative attitude that is being promoted in society when people are practicing this act.
Bad attitude.
Bad attitude.
It's corrupting.
It's making the death of people something more than, like, it's becoming a game.
There are certain behaviors, certain inactions where you might be able to engage without necessarily always rooting for harm. I watch the Super Bowl, but I don't watch UFC and incredibly violent boxing. I can watch the football without rooting for harm of another player. I don't cheer when there's a big hit.
Do you think boxing should be banned?
I think that there might be some people who can watch it without that harm.
There is no athletic competition that I have seen broadcast on a television or attended myself where I have not seen a majority of individuals who celebrate negative events happening to members of other teams.
But I don't think you root
But-
against the welfare of the players of
You
the
don't
teams.
necessarily have to
I
root
don't
for harm.
agree with it.
I think it is totally fair to say, I really want to beat Syracuse today. However, I think it is totally repulsive for me to say, I really want to see their star player break his face.
But the problem with that is I don't see a way to legislate against it, neither do I see a way to make it right to legislate
What we
for it
might
in
not be
cases
able
like
to
this.
necessarily legislate against is the thought that another player should be harmed in a sport, for example. Just as we might be able to not necessarily legislate against the thought of enjoying a particular celebrity dying, but we can legislate against the possibility of somebody making money off of that fact.
Would the idea of celebrity pools, that's essentially gambling, and in many states, is gambling not considered illegal?
Until relatively recently, most states banned gambling, with a few exceptions. Increasingly, with the rise of casino gambling and other forms of gambling, these laws are being changed. So what we're debating right now is actually the ethics of speculation. Speculation detached from, in the case of the death pool, any socially useful purpose. Go ahead, Alex.
I see absolutely no problem with gambling, but when someone starts playing with your life behind your back without you knowing, I almost think it does harm.
Even if you don't know about it.
Well, because there is a chance that you're going to find out, and then the consequences are not going to be negligible. I know that if I found out my name on a website and someone betting like he's going to die today or tomorrow, I'm not going to be happy about this without me knowing.
So it's the idea of people speculating, having a stake in your misfortune without your consent, that you're troubled by.
Yes, and also by the negative consequences of finding out that this is going on.